Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now yesterday we tested the newly released Borderlands 4 with the RTX 4060 and performance struggled a little bit. I paired it with an i5-12400F and we had to turn things down, enable upscaling in order to get 60 frames per second, and even then it wasn't really all that smooth. Today, well, we're doing the unthinkable once again and using integrated graphics to try and play this new game. We've tested the 8700G here a few times on the channel with new releases. Let's just jump into it and see how it goes. So I've paired this with 6400 MHz DDR5, 32 gigs of the stuff. This of course features the 780M iGPU, nothing is overclocked here. I wasn't expecting much jumping into this and we didn't really get too much from it, not without some severe upscaling. But there's something I want to mention first, and that is the same as yesterday, which is in regard to the native resolution. Now I'm running the game here at native with FSR enabled, and as you can see it's basically unplayable, but just like with the 4060 yesterday, you do have to enable upscaling even if you want to set it to native res in order to get the best results. So if you turn upscaling off and you choose native resolution, you're going to get less performance than if you were to choose FSR or XeSS or TSR and set that to native resolution for whatever reason. As you can see here, FSR with full res, we were getting less than 20 frames per second, but if we turn it off, then we're going to get even less than that. Not by much, but it's sort of irrelevant, I guess, because the game is still unplayable at native res, no matter whether or not we choose an upscaling method or not, to be honest. But I thought that was something worth mentioning. We'd also enable XeSS here just as an example, and this is probably going to perform the best at native res. XeSS actually gives us about 1 frame per second more at full resolution than FSR and a couple of frames more than TSR. So it's worth bearing in mind, but again, probably irrelevant when we're getting sub 20 frames per second. Now when it comes to actually enabling upscaling, well, it seems as though FSR was the best for the 8700G here and the 780M iGPU. FSR with performance is actually a decent place to start. In terms of the other visual settings, well, as you can imagine, everything is turned down to its respective lowest. We're not messing around today. The 8700G and 780M isn't exactly intended for modern AAA gaming, but we can make it playable if you consider plus 30 FPS playable, and in cases like this, with hardware like this, I'm more inclined to do so. So here we are then with 1080p as a starting point, the lowest in-game settings, and FSR set to performance mode. As you can see, the game doesn't look all that great. I mean, the visuals anyway, I do appreciate the unique art style of Borderlands. I mentioned this yesterday, and all the other games I seem to recall running, well, you know, on what was at the time fairly modest hardware. Could be wrong, I might be misremembering, but when you look at the visuals here and then you look at the performance, you think, well, judging by how the game looks, it should run better than this. I find a lot of releases these days just frustrating on PC, and I've actually started buying games on PS5 rather than PC to sit down in the evening and play them, because they just run with far less hassle, and it's a pretty sad state of affairs, to be honest, modern PC gaming. But there are still plenty of games out there that run absolutely fine, of course, and I don't want to get into a rant here. Plus, when it comes to Borderlands 4 here, we're using an iGPU. We don't even have a graphics card in this system, so I can't really complain too much with the performance here, considering I was actually expecting about 15 FPS even with upscaling enabled. I don't think this is too bad. Plus 30 doesn't feel all that great here. It's quite jarring. It's like there's some sort of mouse acceleration. Maybe I can turn that off somewhere, but it just feels like a little bit harder to aim. Could just be the slightly lower frame rate, but it feels like you've really got to try a little harder to aim and get the shots off, but there we are. Now, as you can see, the exact figures will be up on screen, but I'm guessing we're running around 35 FPS to 40 FPS as an average, and the percentile lows are probably going to be slightly lower than that. Doesn't feel too inconsistent though, it actually feels quite smooth overall, despite the low average. What you might want to do though with the 780M here is enable Ultra Performance mode. This is going to turn the resolution down noticeably. You are going to notice a difference between performance and Ultra Performance. Whether or not that can be picked up in a video or not, well, let me know in the comments section. It doesn't increase our performance by a significant amount, but it is enough to make the game feel slightly better to play with the 780M iGPU. Now I actually set the VRAM frame buffer to 8 gigs in the BIOS, so 8 gigs is specifically allocated to the iGPU. That leaves us with about 24 gigs of system RAM to play with, which is absolutely fine here. I just find that setting it to 8 gigs rather than leaving it at auto does give us slightly more consistent performance. I've been meaning to make a video about this for a while because some people say leave it at auto, some people say configure the frame buffer manually, and I tend to do the latter. So in terms of performance here with Borderlands 4 FSR Ultra Performance, we're getting about, I'd say, 40 to 45 frames per second now, but the exact figures once again will be up on screen. When we look at the CPU and GPU utilization, well, the CPU sitting back at about 50% usage. We have 8 cores and 16 threads here, which I think really does help in this one. And if we take a look at the 780M, yeah, we're sitting at 97 to 99%, so it's pretty much maxed out here, clocking at over 2 GHz. I'm using the stock cooler that came with the 8700G, and temperatures are remaining pretty decent. The CPU side of things, we're looking at less than 70, and when it comes to the GPU side of things, less than 60 most of the time, and consuming 87 watts of power here. Pretty good all in all. As you can see, the game is definitely playable, but you can forget about 60 frames per second. That is just not happening, which I think you probably all expected. I'm sure some of you were just as surprised to see 30 frames per second as I was. We'll just finish this big guy off here. This is one of the initial bosses. This game is actually more difficult than I anticipated. I think I'm running it on like easy. I've died plenty of times already. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I just suck at Borderlands. But yeah, still running with FSR Ultra Performance. Now in the less sort of enclosed areas, in more open spaces with less going on, you can probably get away with FSR Performance mode, maybe Balance mode, I think. I think that's probably going to give you less than 30 FPS most of the time though. But in those more sort of open areas, you could probably leave things at FSR Performance and turn it down if you want as the action heats up. I found that just leaving it at Ultra Performance was the best bet here because you will still see dips and drops towards 30 FPS anyway, and with FSR Performance mode you're going to get drops below that. You're looking at sort of high to mid 20s in terms of frame rate. But yeah, FSR Ultra Performance not going to be to everyone's taste, that's putting it lightly, but if you've got a system like this that perhaps you mainly use for office work, everyday usage, and you think, you know what, I just want to fire up a bit of Borderlands 4, you've read a few of the reviews talking about horrible performance on some setups, well, you might be pleasantly surprised here. Maybe you're waiting for a graphics card to arrive, you want to start the game, you can probably do so on the 8700G, but it's not going to be all that visually appealing. This is the only sort of integrated graphics solution that will run this game at plus 30 FPS, at least from within my collection, so that's why I've just focused mainly on this today. Now as you can see, we're in a more sort of open area now of the map, still running with FSR Ultra Performance, and things are picking up a little bit. We're looking at plus 40 frames per second, closer to 50 in some instances. I am using OBS to record, I'm using the low CPU usage preset, so we're recording internally, and it does knock about 1 or 2 FPS off the performance that you're seeing on screen. However, the averages were taken from a benchmark when I wasn't recording. So I played the game for a bit while recording, stopped recording, and then took the benchmarks. So yeah, what you see in terms of the numbers on screen is what you get in terms of actual performance. That's all I can really say. Borderlands 4, it's done a lot better than I thought, and that's the positive we can take away from this. If you have like an 8500G, 8600G with slightly different versions of Radeon iGPUs, then I'd love to hear how this game runs for you. Also, if you have some lower end hardware, it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on performance as well down below in the comments. But as for this one, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.